I'm Mina Grimes, 41 years old. In the eyes of my parents, I am a failed, impoverished civil servant, the black sheep of a pristine New England lineage. But they don't know that I currently hold the command of 3,200 Air Force personnel. At the chaotic gate of LAX, my father, a man who just spent the morning showing off his new Rolex submariner, shoved a crumpled boarding pass into my hand. "Your mother, Patrick, and I are in business class," he announced loudly, his voice carrying over the heads of the weary travelers around us. "And here is yours. Economy, middle seat, row 48, right up against the lavatory. I didn't want you to feel self-conscious about your financial situation by sitting in our class. It's better if you're with your own kind." Next to him, my brother Patrick smoothed the lapel of his Armani suit, a smirk playing on his lips as he looked at me with the pity one reserves for a stray dog. I gripped that ticket until my knuckles turned white. They expected me to bow my head and whisper a thank you, just like always. But not today. Today, my C-17 Globemaster III is waiting on the tarmac. If you are tired of being disrespected by the very people who are supposed to love you, comment "justice" below and subscribe. You're going to want to see the blood drain from their faces when I pin my stars on my shoulders. The air inside the PCAF Command Center at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam tasted like stale coffee and ozone. It was a controlled chaos that I had lived in for 20 years, a symphony of ringing phones, clacking keyboards, and low, urgent voices speaking the universal language of the United States Air Force. "General, we have updated telemetry on Tropical Storm Hina," a major called out from the lower pit, his eyes glued to the massive wall of screens dominating the room. "Wind speeds are increasing. It's upgrading to a typhoon in the next 4 hours." I stood on the command deck, arms crossed, staring at the swirling red mass on the digital map that was threatening to swallow the Pacific. I hadn't slept in 72 hours. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand, and every muscle in my back was pulled tight as a bowstring. "Sit rep on the birds," I ordered, my voice raspy but steady. 127 aircraft secured or airborne, ma'am," Colonel Fitch replied from my right. "C-17s are diverting to Guam. The F-22 Raptors are already hangared in concrete. We are at Zulu time, +4, on the evacuation protocol." "Good," I nodded, watching the logistical ballet of billions of dollars of military assets moving under my command. "Keep the lines open to DC. I want hourly updates." General Colin Powell once said, "Leadership is solving problems." That quote was taped to the bottom of my monitor. Right now, my problem was a 100-mile-wide storm system. I could handle that. I could handle the pressure of national security. I could handle the weight of 3,000 lives depending on my decisions. Then, my personal cell phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't the red line. It wasn't the president. It was a customized ringtone I hadn't had the heart to change in a decade. "Mom." I hesitated. The room was buzzing with the intensity of an impending natural disaster. I should have let it go to voicemail. I was a brigadier general. But the conditioning of a lifetime is stronger than military discipline. I stepped back into the shadows of the alcove, away from the prying eyes of my subordinates, and swiped the green button. "Hello, Mom." "Mina, finally." Linda Grimes's voice floated through the line, crystal clear and utterly detached from reality. I could hear the clinking of fine china in the background. She was likely at the country club in Connecticut. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. It's about the wedding in Maui." "Mom, I'm a little busy right now," I said, pressing a hand to my forehead. "There's a situation here in the Pacific. A storm." "Oh, stop being dramatic, Mina," she cut me off, her tone breezy and dismissive. "It's always some situation with your little government job. Listen, I need to know if you think salmon or coral is a better color for the napkins at the rehearsal dinner. Mrs. Calloway is insisting on coral, but I think it looks tacky." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Behind me, a lieutenant was shouting coordinates for a rescue helo. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice low. "I really can't talk about napkins. We are evacuating planes. The weather is bad." "Well, I hope you've asked your supervisor for the time off," she continued, completely ignoring me. "I don't want a repeat of last Christmas where you claimed you had duty." "It's embarrassing, Mina." Telling people my daughter can't come to a family event because she's stuck filing paperwork in a basement somewhere. Paperwork. I looked up at the giant screen. I was currently authorizing the movement of a carrier strike group's support wing. I'll be there, Mom, I said, the familiar taste of defeat rising in my throat. I have leave. Good, she sniffed. Because Patrick just arrived. He closed that merger in Manhattan yesterday. $1 million bonus, Mina. Can you imagine? He's treating us all to a spa day at the Grand Wiley before the wedding. He's such a generous soul. He even offered to pay for your rental car since he knows things are tight for you. The comparison hit me like a physical blow. It was the old 1-2 punch. First, minimize my existence. Second, deify Patrick. That's nice of him, I said, my voice flat. I was a stoic. I had to be. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford, not here, and certainly not with her. Just try to look presentable, dear, Mom added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Don't wear those cargo pants or whatever it is you wear to work. We'll be with the Callaways. They are Harvard people, Mina. Try to blend in. I have to go, Mom. My boss is calling. I hung up before she could say anything else. My hand was shaking slightly, not from the caffeine, not from the sleep deprivation, but from the sheer, suffocating toxicity of that 2-minute conversation. I stepped back out onto the command deck. General? Orders? Colonel Fitch asked, looking at me with concern. She saw the change in my posture. She saw the mask slip, just for a fraction of a second. Maintain current heading, I said, forcing my spine to straighten. Get me the weather update for the Maui approach. I walked back to my desk. Sitting there, amidst the classified documents and satellite photos, was a cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. The wedding invitation. Patrick Grimes and Jessica Calloway. It looked innocent enough, just heavy cardstock and calligraphy. But as I stared at it, the roar of the command center faded into a dull hum. That piece of paper wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. It was a court order to return to a world where I wasn't a general, where I wasn't a leader, where I was just Mina. The disappointment, the charity case, the invisible child sitting in the shadow of the golden sun. I picked it up, feeling the expensive texture under my rough, calloused fingertips. I had faced enemy fire in the Middle East. I had landed planes on runways bombed into Swiss cheese. But the thought of getting on that plane to meet them terrified me more than the typhoon raging outside. General. Fitch pressed again. I shoved the invitation into my pocket, burying it deep. I'm here, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was lying. Let's get these birds on the ground. My quarters on the base were sparse. I didn't keep much, a habit learned from 2 decades of being deployed at a moment's notice. But in the back of my small, standard-issue closet, hanging inside a garment bag that smelled faintly of cedar and pride, was my mess dress. I unzipped the bag slowly. The midnight blue fabric caught the dim light of the room. It was the most formal uniform in the United States Air Force. It wasn't just clothing. It was a biography woven in thread. The silver braid on the sleeves, the cummerbund, the miniature medals that clinked softly against each other. Each one represented a time I had survived, led, or excelled. The Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star. To anyone else, this uniform commanded instant silence and respect. To my family, it was a Halloween costume. It was a reminder that their daughter had chosen to be a government grunt instead of a trophy wife. My hand hovered over the silver stars on the shoulder boards. Touching them triggered a memory so vivid I could almost smell the expensive scotch my father liked to drink. I was 18 years old. It was a humid afternoon in our Connecticut living room. I had just sprinted home from the mailbox, waving a thick envelope stamped with the Department of Defense seal. Dad! Mom! I had shouted, bursting onto the patio. I got into the academy. The United States Air Force Academy, USAFA. It was harder to get into than Harvard. It was 4 years of hell in Colorado Springs that would forge me into an officer. I expected hugs. I expected champagne. Robert Grimes didn't even look up from his Wall Street Journal. He just took a sip of his iced tea, the ice cubes clinking with a sound that suddenly felt very cold. The Air Force, he said, his voice dripping with disappointment. Mina, we talked about this. There's a perfectly good community college 20 minutes away. You could study art history. You could meet a nice young man from a good family. But Dad, this is a full scholarship. It's service. It's honor, I pleaded, my heart sinking into my sneakers. It's a place for men, Mina, he said, finally looking at me with eyes that were tired of my ambition. Who is going to want to marry a woman who wears combat boots? You're ruining your prospects. That was the beginning. The divide started there, a hairline fracture that would eventually become a canyon. Over the next 4 years, the comparison game began. While I was in the mountains of Colorado, learning how to survive in the wilderness with nothing but a knife and a parachute cord, my brother Patrick was getting his MBA at Wharton. Every phone call home was a monologue about Patrick. Patrick got an A in microeconomics. Mom would chirp, "He's going to be a titan of industry." I wanted to tell her that I had just passed my solo flight check in a T-38 Talon, breaking the sound barrier at 30,000 feet. But I knew she wouldn't care. To them, Patrick was building wealth. I was just playing soldier. But the memory that stung the most, the one that made my hand tremble as I touched my uniform now, was from Patrick's engagement party 3 years ago. It was a black tie affair at a rented estate in the Hamptons. I had flown in from a deployment in Germany, exhausted, jet-lagged, but happy to see them. I was a lieutenant colonel then. I was managing a logistics budget of $40 million. I was responsible for the movement of assets that exceeded the GDP of small nations. I was wearing a simple navy cocktail dress. It was elegant, understated, and something I had bought with my own money. I was standing by the punch bowl when my Aunt Jaime, Mom's sister and chief enforcer of the family snobbery, cornered me. Mom was right behind her, clutching her pearls. "Mina, sweetie," Aunt Jaime cooed, looking me up and down with a mixture of pity and distaste. "It's so brave of you to come." "Brave?" I asked, confused. "It's my brother's engagement party." "We know things are tough," Mom whispered, leaning in close so the other guests wouldn't hear. She pressed something into my hand. It was cold and dry. I looked down. It was a crumpled $100 bill. "What is this?" I asked, feeling my face flush hot. "For your wardrobe, dear," Aunt Jaime said loud enough for the nearby waiter to hear. "We know the military pays peanuts. We didn't want you to feel embarrassed standing next to Jessica's bridesmaids. Go buy yourself something. Less off the rack for the wedding. Don't let people know how much you're struggling." I stood there, frozen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out my bank statement. I wanted to tell them that I made more than enough to buy this entire party if I wanted to. But I didn't. Because in the Grimes family, love was conditional. And the condition was that I remained the charity case so they could feel benevolent. This is the reality so many of us face. We work twice as hard to be half as respected by the people who share our DNA. If you have ever felt small in the presence of those who should build you up, please hit that like button right now. And drop a comment below with just one word: respect. Let's show the world that we know our own worth, even if our families are blind to it. I looked at the crumpled bill in my memory, and then back at the crisp uniform hanging before me. The temptation to wear this mess dress to Patrick's wedding in Maui was overwhelming. Imagine walking into that reception wearing my rank, my medals, my achievements displayed in silver and gold. It would be a nuclear bomb. It would force them to acknowledge me. But it would also ruin the day. It would make me the villain. "Look at Mina," they would say. Always trying to make it about herself, showing off her little costume. I sighed, the sound heavy in the empty room. Slowly, painfully, I zipped the garment bag back up. I pushed the general's uniform to the back of the closet, into the dark. I turned to my dresser and pulled out a stack of civilian clothes. Old jeans, a generic blouse I bought at Target, a pair of sensible, worn-out sandals. I began to pack my suitcase. I wasn't packing for a vacation. I was packing a costume. I was preparing to play the role of Mina the failure, the poor relation, the disappointment. Because that was the only version of me they knew how to love. I clicked the suitcase shut. The sound echoed like a cell door closing. I grabbed my purse, checked for the crumpled economy ticket, and walked out the door. I was leaving the general behind. Mina the daughter was heading into the storm. On the wall of my office, taped right at eye level where I couldn't miss it, was a block of text printed on plain white paper. It wasn't a regulation or a protocol. It was a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena." I read it every single morning. Today, I read it 3 times. I was about to step out of my arena and into a world where the critics didn't just count, they were the only voices that mattered. "Signing off on the transfer of authority," I said, my voice steady, though my stomach was doing barrel rolls. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner on my desk. The secure terminal beeped and the screen flashed green. "Command authority transferred. Call Marissa Fitch." Colonel Fitch was standing on the other side of my desk. She was a firecracker of a woman from Texas, sharp as a tack and fiercely loyal. She watched me slide the heavy cryptographic keycard across the mahogany surface toward her. "You have the con, Marissa," I said. "Keep an eye on that typhoon. If it shifts north, trigger the Guam contingency immediately." "Understood, General," Fitch said, picking up the keycard. But she didn't leave. She stood there, arms crossed over her flight suit, staring at me. Her eyes traveled from my face down to my outfit, the faded beige blouse and the loose-fitting jeans I had changed into. She let out a snort that was decidedly unmilitary. "With all due respect, ma'am," she drawled, "you look like you're about to go coupon clipping at a grocery store, not attending a high society wedding." I picked up my purse, a generic leather bag I'd bought at an outlet mall 5 years ago. "That's the point, Marissa. It's camouflage." Fitch shook her head, her expression darkening. She walked around the desk, invading my personal space in a way only a best friend and second-in-command could. "I don't get it, Mina. I really don't," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are a brigadier general in the United States Air Force. You command a wing of strategic airlift capabilities. You have a star on your shoulder. Why in God's name are you letting your family treat you like you're some unemployed drifter?" I sighed, looking past her to the window, where the gray sky was threatening rain. "They know I have a job, Marissa. They just don't understand what it is." "So tell them." Fitch threw her hands up. "Tell them you outrank every person in that country club they worship. Tell them you have the president on speed dial." "If I tell them I'm a general," I said, making air quotes, "my father will nod and ask if that means I'm the general manager of the motor pool. To Robert and Linda Grimes, government work is just administration. It's filing cabinets and waiting in line at the DMV. They think general is just a fancy title for a senior bureaucrat who pushes paper. They don't see the planes. They don't see the strategy. They just see a civil servant salary." Fitch looked like she wanted to punch a wall. "But that's insane. You make—" "I know what I make," I cut her off. I did know. I knew it down to the penny. It was a math equation I ran in my head every time Patrick bragged about his bonuses. I did the mental calculation again, just to ground myself. My base pay as an 07 with over 20 years of service. The basic allowance for housing, which in Hawaii, one of the most expensive zip codes in America, was astronomical. The flight pay. The cost of living allowance. It all added up to a compensation package hovering right around $400,000 a year. I wasn't destitute. I wasn't struggling. I was in the top tax bracket of the United States. I earned basically the same amount as my brother Patrick, the financial wizard. The difference was in where the money went. Patrick wore his wealth. It was on his wrist in the form of a Rolex. It was in his garage in the form of a Porsche. It was in the Hermes Birkin bags he bought his fiancée to prove his worth. My wealth was invisible. It was in my diversified investment portfolio that I never talked about. It was in the college funds I'd secretly set up for my nieces. And mostly, it was in the checks I wrote every month to the Wounded Warrior Project and the Air Force Aide Society. Last year, I donated $50,000 to build housing for homeless veterans. Patrick spent $50,000 on a membership to a golf club in the Hamptons. We were not the same. "I don't need them to know about the money, Marissa," I said softly. I use my money for things that matter. I don't need to wear a price tag to feel valuable. It's not about the money, Mina, Fitch said, her eyes softening with a mixture of frustration and pity. It's about the respect. You're letting them walk all over you. You're playing small so they can feel big. She picked up a folder from the desk and tapped it rhythmically against her palm. You know what you look like right now? She asked. A tired woman going on vacation, I ventured. No, Fitch said, her voice sharp. You look like an eagle trying to walk like a chicken because you're afraid of scaring the other chickens in the coop. The image hit me hard. An eagle trying to walk like a chicken. They are my family, Marissa, I said, feeling the old familiar defensive walls going up. I just want to keep the peace. It's just for a weekend. I can handle it. I'm a stoic, remember? Being a stoic means enduring pain you can't change, Fitch countered. It doesn't mean volunteering for abuse you don't deserve. She walked over to the heavy steel door of the office and held it open for me. The noise of the outer office, the ringing phones, the chatter of the staff flooded back in. Go, Fitch said. But do me a favor, General. When you're sitting in that middle seat in economy, just remember who you actually are. Don't let them clip your wings. I adjusted my purse strap, feeling the weight of the civilian costume settling on my shoulders. It felt heavier than my rucksack ever did. I'll see you in 3 days, Colonel, I said. Keep my birds safe. I always do, she replied. I walked out of the command suite, past the young airmen who snapped to attention as I passed, even in my plain clothes. They knew who I was. They respected me. As I stepped out of the air-conditioned building into the humid pre-storm air of Hawaii, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Behind me was the world where I was a general. Ahead of me was the world where I was nothing. I walked toward my car, a sensible 4-year-old Honda Accord. Patrick would have laughed at it. He would have called it a commuter car. I got in, gripped the steering wheel, and took a deep breath. The man in the arena, I repeated to myself, the face marred by dust and sweat and blood. I was leaving the arena, and I was heading straight into the lion's den. Los Angeles International Airport was its own special circle of hell. It was a cacophony of rolling suitcase wheels, screaming toddlers, and the robotic voice of the PA system announcing delays. The air inside Terminal 4 smelled of stress, stale pretzels, and jet fuel. I stood near the entrance of the check-in counter, checking my watch. I had arrived exactly at 900 hours. Punctuality wasn't a habit for me, it was a religion. I scanned the crowd, looking for them. It wasn't hard. You didn't need a radar system to spot the Grimes family. They were making an entrance. My father, Robert, was leading the phalanx, pushing a luggage cart that was stacked so high with Louis Vuitton monogrammed bags, it looked like a monument to capitalism. My mother, Linda, walked a step behind him, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and a scarf that probably cost more than a senior airman's monthly paycheck. And then there was Patrick. My brother was walking with that loose-limbed, arrogant stride of a man who has never had to run for cover. He was wearing a beige linen suit, Armani, doubtless. That was entirely impractical for travel but perfect for projecting status. He was typing on his phone, barely looking up as people swerved to avoid hitting him. I looked down at my own gear. I had one bag, a black tactical carry-on that fit everything I needed for 4 days. Efficient, mobile, invisible. They spotted me, or rather, my mother spotted my lack of luggage. Mina, she called out, waving a manicured hand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I had negotiated with warlords in Afghanistan. I could handle a weekend with my parents. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad, I said, forcing a smile as they approached. There were no hugs. The Grimes family didn't do public displays of affection. They did public displays of assessment. My mother stopped in front of me, lifting her sunglasses to perch them on her forehead. Her eyes, sharp and blue like mine, scanned my face like she was looking for a crack in the foundation. Oh dear, she sighed, reaching out to touch my cheek with a cold finger. You look so weathered. It's good to see you too, Mom, I said, pulling back slightly. No, really, Mina, she continued, her voice loud enough for the couple standing in line behind us to hear. Your skin is like parchment. Look at these crow's feet. And the sun damage on your neck? It's leather. Does the military not teach women about moisturizer? Or do they just expect you to look like one of the men? I touched my neck instinctively. The sun damage was windburn from standing on a flight line in Guam for 12 hours straight, directing relief supplies while 60-mile-per-hour winds whipped sand and salt against my skin. It wasn't neglect. It was evidence of work. I've been working outside, Mom, I said quietly. Well, you need a peel, she declared, turning her attention back to her reflection in a glass partition. Remind me to book you an appointment at the hotel spa. You can't stand next to Patrick's fiancée looking like a field hand. Patrick finally looked up from his phone. He flashed me a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Hey, little sis, he said, looking me up and down. Nice outfit. Very soccer mom on a budget. It's comfortable, Patrick, I replied, gripping the handle of my bag tighter. Comfort is for people who can't afford style, he quipped, checking his reflection in his phone screen. You know, I just flew first class on Emirates to Dubai last month. Now that is travel. Private suite, shower on the plane, caviar service. You should try it sometime. Oh, wait. I guess you don't get those perks flying cargo out of dusty little bases in the middle of nowhere, do you? I fly on C-17s, Patrick, I said. They are engineering marvels. They are flying dump trucks, he laughed, dismissing the pride of the Air Force with a wave of his hand. But hey, to each their own. I guess someone has to haul the boxes. We began to move toward the check-in counters. The line for economy was snaking back toward the door, while the priority access lane was empty. So, Patrick said, falling into step beside me as Dad maneuvered the luggage cart. Did you have to beg your boss for this time off? I know hourly employees get penalized for missing shifts. I stopped walking. The insult was so casual, so effortless. I am not an hourly employee, Patrick, I said, my voice hardening. I am a salaried officer. Right, he chuckled, patting my shoulder condescendingly. But I know government salaries. It's tight. Look, if you're losing money by being here, if they're docking your pay or whatever, just let me know. I can compensate you for the lost wages. I don't want you stressing about rent while we're trying to celebrate. Compensate me. The rage flared up in my chest, hot and sudden. He was offering to throw me pennies while I managed a budget that could buy his entire investment firm. I don't need your money, I said through gritted teeth. Don't be proud, Mina, Dad chimed in from the front, not even turning around. Patrick is just being generous. He's the golden boy for a reason. You should be grateful he looks out for you. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I needed to change the subject before I said something that would get me court-martialed by my own mother. Actually, Dad, I said, trying to engage him, I had a pretty intense week. We were coordinating a massive storm relief operation out of Guam. We had to route ships and aircraft around a typhoon to get medical supplies to... Storms. Always storms, Dad interrupted, cutting me off with a bored wave of his hand. It's so gloomy, Mina. Nobody wants to hear about disasters on a vacation. He turned his beaming face toward Patrick. Son, tell me again about that new driver you bought. And the 14th hole at Pebble Beach. Now that is a story. Oh, it was epic, Dad, Patrick launched in, his voice booming with self-importance. So the wind was coming off the ocean, right? And I had this impossible lie. I stood there, surrounded by the noise of the terminal, feeling completely silenced. I had just saved thousands of lives. I had outmaneuvered a typhoon. But in the Grimes family hierarchy, my heroism was boring. Patrick's golf game was legendary. I looked at their backs as they walked toward the first-class check-in, leaving me trailing behind with my single bag. They didn't even look to see if I was following. They assumed I would. I always did. I was the satellite orbiting their sun, dark and cold and necessary only to show them how bright they shone. But as I watched Patrick gesture expansively, knocking into a passerby without apologizing, a thought crystallized in my mind. Enjoy the show, Patrick, I thought, because the curtain is about to drop. I adjusted my grip on my bag and followed them into the lion's den. The overhead speaker chimed with that familiar, cheerful tone that always precedes a stampede. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready to begin pre-boarding for Flight 294 to Maui. We welcome our first class and Diamond Medallion passengers to board at this time through the priority lane. The air around Gate 42 shifted. It was a physical division of humanity. On the left, the velvet rope was unhooked for the elite. On the right, the tired masses in Zone 5 shifted their backpacks and sighed, preparing for the long wait. My father, Robert, clapped his hands together. It was a sharp, authoritative sound that made my mother jump slightly. "All right, troops, that's us," he announced, beaming as if he had personally piloted the plane to the gate. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a thick envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what was coming. I had prepared myself for it. I told myself I didn't care about legroom or hot towels. I was a soldier. I could sleep on a cargo pallet strapped to a Humvee. I could handle a coach seat. But it wasn't about the seat. It was about the gesture. Dad pulled out the boarding passes like a magician revealing cards. "Linda, darling," he said, handing a crisp, stiff card to my mother. "Row 2, window, away from the galley so you can nap." "Oh, thank you, Robert," Mom cooed, tucking it into her Chanel purse. "Patrick," Dad continued, handing the next one to my brother. "Row 3, aisle. I know you like to stretch out those legs, and I ordered you the scotch you like." Patrick took the ticket, flicking it with his thumb. "Nice. Thanks, Dad. I'll see if I can get some work done before we hit the island." Dad took the third ticket for himself. "And I'm right next to your mother." Then, his hand went back into the envelope. It came out empty. He patted his pockets, acting out a little pantomime of forgetfulness that felt rehearsed. "Ah, right," he said. He reached into his back pants pocket, the place where you keep receipts and used tissues, and pulled out a piece of thermal paper. It was crinkled. It had been folded and unfolded. He held it out to me. "Here you go, Mina." I took it. The paper felt thin and cheap between my fingers. I looked at the numbers printed in bold black ink. Seat 48B. Row 48. The very back of the plane. The fuselage narrowed back there, and B, the middle seat. I looked up at him, unable to keep the shock off my face. "Dad, this is the last row." "Is it?" He feigned surprise, peering at the ticket over his reading glasses. "Oh, yes. So it is. Well, you know how busy the flights are these days." "But Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You bought 3 first-class tickets. We booked this trip months ago." The smile on his face didn't falter, but his eyes changed. They lost their warmth and took on that pitying, patronizing glint that I hated more than anything in the world. He stepped closer, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it, not in affection, but in a way that felt like he was holding me down. "Mina, sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping to a loud whisper, meant for an audience. "I did this for you." "For me?" I repeated, dumbfounded. "Yes," he explained slowly, as if talking to a slow child. "I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. Think about it. If you sat up front with us, well, it's just not your world, is it? The champagne, the service, the luxury. I know how tight things are for you on your government salary. I didn't want you to sit there feeling self-conscious, worrying about how you don't fit in with that level of lifestyle." He gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane, toward the tunnel where the economy passengers would soon herd. "Back there," he said, "you'll be with your own kind, regular folks, people who understand the value of a dollar. You won't have to pretend to be something you're not. It's better this way. You'll feel a sense of belonging." I stood frozen. The noise of the terminal faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. He hadn't just cheaped out. He had segregated me. He had weaponized a plane ticket to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. The back of the bus. The servants' quarters. Patrick leaned in, checking his reflection in the glass of the boarding door. He chuckled, a low, wet sound. "Don't worry, sis," he smirked, adjusting his collar. "If the flight attendants give us warm cookies, I'll wrap one up in a napkin and bring it back to you. If you're a good girl, I'll save you dessert." He winked. Something inside me fractured. It wasn't a break. It was a release. It was the sound of the final cable snapping on a bridge that had been swaying in the wind for 40 years. I looked at the crumpled piece of paper in my hand. Seat 48B, right next to the lavatory. For 6 hours, I would smell the chemicals and hear the flush of the toilet squeezed between two strangers while my family clinked crystal glasses 50 feet away. I know I am not the only one who has felt this sting. That moment when your family goes out of their way to remind you that you are less than, that you don't deserve a seat at their table. If you are feeling this rage with me right now, smash that like button. And please comment justice below. Let me know you're ready to see the tables turn. My hand trembled. I wanted to tear the ticket into confetti and throw it in his face. I wanted to scream that I commanded billion-dollar assets, but I didn't. Not yet. At that exact second, my phone buzzed in my other hand. I looked down. The screen lit up with a message from Colonel Fitch. From KOL, Fitch, 0912 Zulu. Storm. Update, typhoon. Hina shifted north. The corridor is open. My bird is fueled and wheels up in 30 mics. The pilot says he has an empty jump seat in the cockpit with your name on it. You want a lift, General? I stared at the screen. My bird. A C-17 Globemaster III. 4 Pratt & Whitney engines. A flying fortress that could carry an Abrams tank. I looked at the crumpled ticket in my left hand. Row 48B. I looked at the text message in my right hand. The cockpit. I looked up at my father, who was turning away, ready to present his priority ticket to the gate agent. He thought the conversation was over. He thought he had put me in my box. A cold, calm clarity washed over me. The heat in my face vanished. My heart rate slowed to a combat rhythm. I didn't need their seat, I didn't need their pity, and I certainly didn't need their dessert. I took a breath, typed 2 letters in reply to Fitch, OMW, on my way. Then I looked at the back of my father's head. Dad, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the gate like a knife. He turned around, annoyed. What is it now, Mina? We're boarding. I didn't step toward the economy lane. I didn't step toward him. I stood my ground, clutching the phone that held my salvation. The storm wasn't in the Pacific anymore. It was right here, standing at gate 42. And it was about to make landfall. The sounds of Terminal 4 seemed to warp and bend, stretching into a surreal, muffled hum. The only thing that felt real was the piece of thermal paper in my hand and the cold, hard weight of the decision sitting in my chest. For 41 years, I had held on to scraps like this. I had held on to the backhanded compliments, the conditional love, the charity that came with a price tag of humiliation. I had accepted my seat at the kids' table. I had accepted the role of the grateful, lesser sibling. But the storm had shifted, and so had I. I looked at my father's expectant face. He was waiting for me to nod, to shrink, to shuffle off toward the economy line like a good little soldier. He was waiting for the submission. I opened my hand. I didn't crumple the ticket. I didn't tear it. I simply relaxed my fingers and let gravity take over. The boarding pass for seat 48B fluttered down. It did a little pirouette in the air, light as a feather, before landing face up on the dirty, gray airport carpet, right next to the polished toe of my father's Italian loafer. The silence that followed was louder than a jet engine. I don't need this, Dad, I said. My voice was calm. It wasn't the voice of his daughter. It was the voice of a commanding officer giving a final briefing. I don't need the seat, and I don't need the lesson. My father blinked, staring at the paper on the floor as if I had just dropped a live grenade. He looked up, his face reddening with a mixture of confusion and rising anger. Mina, pick that up, he snapped, his voice dropping an octave into that tone he used when I was a teenager. Don't be dramatic. You're making a scene. Yeah, seriously, Patrick chimed in, stepping forward aggressively. He looked around at the other passengers, offering an apologetic shrug before turning his glare back to me. What is wrong with you? Dad spends hundreds of dollars to get you a ticket, and you throw it on the floor? You are such an ungrateful brat. Just get on the plane, Mina. Stop trying to make everything about you. It's not about me, Patrick, I said, meeting his eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small looking at him. I felt bored. It's about standards. Standards? My mother let out a shrill, disbelief-filled laugh. You're wearing a blouse from a discount rack and you're talking about standards? Honey, look at yourself. You're embarrassing us. Pick it up, Dad commanded, pointing a shaking finger at the floor. Now, or you can swim to Maui for all I care. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched them. They looked so small suddenly. 3 people obsessed with their luggage and their legroom, thinking they owned the world because they had a platinum medallion status. No, I said. Before Patrick could unleash the tirade of insults I could see building behind his eyes, the atmosphere in the terminal shifted. It started with a sound. From the direction of the TSA priority checkpoint, the secured diplomatic lane that was closed to the public, came the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots. Not the shuffling of tourists in sneakers, but the synchronized, hard-soled cadence of military precision. Clack, clack, clack. The crowd near the checkpoint began to part. People stopped dragging their suitcases. Heads turned. The murmur of conversation died down, replaced by the hush that always accompanies a display of true power. My family turned to look, annoyed by the distraction. Walking toward us was a phalanx of 3. Leading the V formation was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of steel and excellence. It was Captain Elisa Rouse, my aide de camp. She wasn't wearing her flight suit today. She was wearing her service dress blues. The jacket was tailored to perfection, hugging her shoulders without a wrinkle. The silver U.S. insignia on her lapels caught the terminal lights. Her ribbon rack, a colorful grid of commendations, sat perfectly aligned above her left pocket. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, so tight it defied physics. Flanking her on either side were 2 security forces airmen. They were giants, 6'4", broad-shouldered, wearing immaculate operational camouflage patterns, with black berets pulled low over their eyes. They moved with the lethal grace of predators, their eyes scanning the perimeter, creating a moving bubble of security that pushed the civilians back without them saying a word. Who is that? Mom whispered, clutching her purse. Is it a politician? Probably some VIP, Patrick sneered, though he stepped back instinctively. Show-offs. They weren't looking at the VIP lounge. They weren't looking at the first-class line. They were walking straight toward us. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The 2 security forces airmen stepped out to the sides, creating a physical barrier between the public and the space where we stood. One of them gently but firmly extended an arm to hold back a businessman who had drifted too close. Captain Rouse didn't break stride until she was exactly 3 paces away from me. She ignored my father. She didn't even glance at Patrick, who was standing there with his mouth slightly open, looking like a confused toddler in an expensive suit. She looked directly at me. Her expression was stone. It was the face of the United States Air Force. Then, with a snap that echoed off the high ceilings of the terminal, she brought her heels together. The sound was like a gunshot. Crack. In one fluid, practiced motion, she raised her right hand. Her fingers were stiff, aligned perfectly, the tip of her middle finger touching the corner of her eyebrow. A salute? It wasn't a casual wave. It was a render of honors. It was a gesture of absolute, unwavering subordination and respect. The terminal had gone completely silent. Even the PA system seemed to pause. Captain Rouse held the salute, her eyes locked on mine. She wouldn't drop it until I returned it. That was the protocol. She was waiting for the superior officer. I slowly shifted my weight. I let my shoulders drop, shedding the posture of the beaten-down daughter and assuming the stance that I had earned through 20 years of blood and sacrifice. I raised my hand and returned the salute, crisp and sharp. Captain, I said, dropping my hand. She cut her salute instantly, snapping back to the position of attention. Ma'am. Her voice was clear, authoritative, and loud enough to be heard 3 gates away. General Grimes. The words hung in the air. General Grimes. My father dropped the boarding passes. They scattered on the floor next to my economy ticket. General? My mother squeaked, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. Captain Rouse didn't acknowledge them. She kept her eyes fixed on me. The flight plan has been filed, General, Rouse reported, her tone professional and urgent. Sitrep on Typhoon Hina shows a clean corridor. The C-17 is fueled and prepped on the tarmac. The crew is standing by for your arrival." She paused, then added, "Command requested I escort you personally to the aircraft, ma'am. We have a convoy waiting curbside to take you to the flight line. We are ready to step on your order." I looked at Rouse, then I turned my head slowly to look at my family. They were frozen statues. Patrick's face had drained of all color. He looked from Captain Rouse's uniform to my face, then back to Rouse, his brain trying to compute an equation that didn't make sense. The sister he was going to buy dessert for was being addressed as a general by a woman who looked like she could kill him with a paperclip. My father's mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. He looked at the crumpled ticket on the floor, seat 48B, and then up at the stars on Captain Rouse's uniform, realizing they were subordinate to the woman standing in front of him. I adjusted the strap of my bag. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to argue. The time for talking was over. "Very good, Captain," I said, my voice cool and detached. "Let's go. I have a plane to catch." "Yes, ma'am," Rouse barked. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to lead the way. The two security forces giants turned, creating a protective phalanx around me. I took one step, then stopped. I turned back to my father one last time. He was staring at me with a look of absolute terror. "You guys enjoy the flight," I said, gesturing vaguely to the commercial airliner outside the window. "I hear the cookies in economy are delicious." I turned my back on them. I walked through the corridor of stunned onlookers, flanked by my soldiers, the sound of our boots drowning out the pathetic protests of the family I was leaving behind. "Mina, stop this nonsense right now." My father's voice cracked, losing its cultivated country club baritone and pitching into something desperate and shrill. I didn't stop. I kept walking, my boots clicking in perfect rhythm with the heavy thud of the security forces' airmen flanking me. But Patrick, fueled by a lifetime of entitlement and the sudden, terrifying loss of control, jogged around the human wall of security to block my path. The two giant airmen tensed instantly, their hands twitching toward their belts. "Stand down," I murmured softly. They held their ground but didn't tackle him. Patrick stood in front of me, his face flushed a blotchy red that clashed with his expensive linen suit. He was panting slightly, his eyes darting from Captain Rouse to me, trying to find the punchline of the joke. "What is this?" Patrick demanded, gesturing wildly at my entourage. "Is this some kind of cosplay? Did you hire actors?" "You're a mid-level bureaucrat, Mina. You file paperwork. You don't have people." The terminal had gone quiet again. The show wasn't over. The audience, the tired families, the business travelers, the college kids on spring break, were all watching. Phones were raised like lighters at a concert, recording every second. I stopped and looked at my brother. Really looked at him. For decades, he had been the giant in my world, the golden idol I was forced to worship. Now, seeing him sweat under the fluorescent lights of LAX, he looked incredibly small. "It's not a costume, Patrick," I said. I reached into my small black bag. My fingers brushed past my wallet and found the small velvet-lined case I always kept with me. It was a superstition, a talisman. I pulled it out and snapped the lid open. Inside lay a single, silver star. It wasn't plastic. It wasn't a prop. It was solid silver, authorized by Congress and presented to me by the Secretary of the Air Force. I took the star out. With slow, deliberate movements, I pinned it onto the collar of my discount rack blouse. It caught the overhead lights, gleaming with a cold, hard brilliance that made the diamonds on my mother's fingers look like broken glass. "Brigadier General," I said, my voice calm and projecting clearly to the back of the gate area. "That is my rank. It's not an administrative title. It means I command the 15th Wing. It means when I speak, the United States Air Force listens." My mother put a hand to her mouth, her Chanel bag slipping from her shoulder to the crook of her elbow. "A general?" she whispered, horrified. But girls aren't generals, Mina. You never said." "I tried to tell you." I cut her off, turning my gaze to her. "For 20 years, I tried to tell you about my promotions, my deployments, my medals. You interrupted me to talk about Patrick's golf handicap. You told me my stories were boring. so I stopped telling them. Patrick let out a scoff, trying to regain his footing. He pointed a shaking finger at Captain Rouse. Okay, fine, so you got a promotion. Big deal. But this? He waved at the scene. Private security? A private plane? Who do you think you are, Mina? You think the taxpayers want to fund your little joyride to a wedding? That's fraud. I bet the IRS would love to hear about. I laughed. It was a short, dry sound. You really don't get it, do you? I stepped closer to him. It's not a private jet, Patrick. It's a C-17 Globemaster III. I let the name hang in the air for a second. It has a wingspan of 170 feet, I continued, reciting the specs I knew better than my own social security number. It is powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney F-117 turbofan engines. It can carry an M1 Abrams tank, 3 Apache helicopters, or, in this case, a command element needed in the Pacific Theater. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout. And do you know how much it costs? Patrick blinked, mute. $218 million, I said. The number hit him like a physical slap. His eyes widened. Your first-class ticket to Dubai cost, what, 10,000? Maybe 15? I tilted my head. The aircraft waiting for me on the tarmac is worth more than your entire firm, Patrick. It's worth more than every house, car, and suit you will ever own, combined. And I don't just ride in it. I command it. Patrick's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like a fish pulled onto a dock, gasping, desperate, and completely out of his element. I turned away from him and looked at my father. Robert Grimes was standing by the ticket counter, holding the 3 priority boarding passes in his hand. He looked old, suddenly, undeniably old. The arrogance that usually held his spine straight had evaporated, leaving a slumped, confused man in a blazer. I walked over to him. The crowd parted for me, murmuring. That's awesome, a teenage boy whispered loud enough for me to hear. She's a badass. I stopped in front of my father. I looked down at the floor where my crumpled economy tickets still lay, dusty and forgotten. Dad, I said. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and watery. He looked at the silver star on my collar. He looked at the soldiers behind me. Mina, he started, his voice trembling. I didn't know. Why didn't you say? You said you wanted me to be with my own kind, I said, quoting his words from 5 minutes ago. You said I wouldn't fit in up in first class? You were right. I gestured toward the glass windows where the massive gray tail of the C-17 was visible in the distance, rising above the commercial airliners like a shark among goldfish. I don't belong in seat 48B, Dad, and I don't belong in first class with you. I straightened my back, standing at my full height. I belong in the cockpit, I said. I belong in the sky. That is where my kind lives. For a second, nobody moved. Then, somewhere from the back of the economy line, a woman started clapping. Then a man joined in. Then the teenagers. Within seconds, the gate area erupted. It wasn't polite golf clapping. It was a roar. People were cheering. A guy in a baseball cap yelled, "Thank you for your service, General." My parents and Patrick stood frozen in the center of the applause, but it wasn't for them. For the first time in their lives, they were the background extras. They were the spectators. My mother's face flushed a deep, beet red. She tried to hide behind her sunglasses, but it was too late. Patrick looked down at his shoes, unable to meet the eyes of the people who were laughing at his earlier arrogance. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. This wasn't a performance for me. It was a correction of the record. Let's move out, Captain, I said to Rouse. Yes, ma'am. We turned and marched toward the exit doors that led to the tarmac shuttle. As the automatic doors slid open, letting in the smell of jet fuel and freedom, I didn't look back. I left the Grimes family standing in the ruins of their own ego, clutching their first-class tickets that suddenly seemed worth less than the paper they were printed on. The vibration of a C-17 Globemaster III is different from a commercial airliner. It doesn't hum. It growls. It is a low, guttural thrum of raw power that resonates right through the floorboards and into your bones. To most people, it's noise. To me, it's a lullaby. I sat in the jump seat behind the pilot and co-pilot, wearing a headset that blocked out the roar of the four Pratt& Whitney engines outside. The cockpit was a sanctuary of switches, dials, and illuminated screens. Smooth sailing all the way to Kihului, General. The pilot, a young major named Davis, said over the comms. We've got a tailwind pushing us. Estimated time of arrival is 30 minutes ahead of schedule. Copy that, Major, I replied, pressing the mic button. Good work navigating that corridor. I leaned back, adjusting my sunglasses. Classic aviators, standard issue, not a fashion statement like the ones my mother wore. Through the massive glass canopy, the Pacific Ocean stretched out like a sheet of hammered blue steel. Above us, the sky was a piercing, endless cobalt. I took a sip of the black coffee the loadmaster had brought me in a paper cup. It was bitter and hot, just the way I liked it. For the first time in days, the knot in my chest uncoiled. Up here, at 35,000 feet, the petty squabbles of the ground didn't exist. Up here, rank mattered. Competence mattered. Physics mattered. I thought about the crumpled ticket lying on the floor of LAX. Seat 48B. A seat designed for someone small, someone powerless. Then, a verse from Sunday school drifted into my mind. Unbidden, but welcome. Isaiah 40:31. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. I looked at the silver star pinned to my collar, reflecting the sunlight. I wasn't walking anymore. I was soaring. But while I found peace in the stratosphere, the atmosphere was drastically different 5 miles to our west and 2,000 feet below us. Flight 294 was a flying pressure cooker. The first-class cabin of the commercial airliner was supposed to be an oasis of luxury, but for the Grimes family, it was a torture chamber upholstered in leather. Robert Grimes stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by. He hadn't spoken a word since takeoff. His glass of complimentary champagne sat untouched on the tray table, the bubbles going flat. He kept replaying the scene in the terminal, the salute, the hushed crowd, the way his daughter had looked at him with eyes that held no fear, only pity. "Robert," Linda whispered, leaning across the center console. Her face was pale, her makeup looking stark under the harsh cabin lighting. Is it real? Is she really a general?" Robert didn't turn his head. "You saw the ID, Linda. You saw the plane." "But how?" she hissed, wringing her hands. "She never said anything. I thought she was a clerk. I thought she answered phones for some colonel. Why didn't she tell us?" "Because we never asked," Robert said. His voice was hollow. It was the first honest thing he had said in 20 years. Across the aisle, Patrick was in a state of manic agitation. He had declined the hot towel service. He had ignored the flight attendant offering warm nuts. Instead, he had pulled out his credit card and paid $30 for the high-speed in-flight Wi-Fi. He needed to know. He needed to find a flaw. He needed to prove that this was all some elaborate lie, or at least that her rank wasn't that important. He opened Google on his phone and typed in the search bar with aggressive thumbs, Mina Grimes Air Force. He hit enter. The results loaded instantly, and Patrick's jaw tightened. The first result wasn't a LinkedIn profile or a government directory. It was a Wikipedia page. Brigadier General Mina J. Grimes. He clicked it. The photo at the top showed his sister, his failure of a sister, standing in full service dress, looking stern and commanding in front of an American flag. He scrolled down, his eyes skimming the text. Decorations: Distinguished Service Medal, Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit. Education: United States Air Force Academy, Distinguished Graduate. He scrolled further to the images. Mina shaking hands with the President of the United States in the Oval Office. Mina standing on the ramp of a cargo plane in Kabul, directing an evacuation while Marines stood guard around her. Mina cutting a ribbon at a new veterans hospital wing that she had fundraised for. "Unbelievable," Patrick muttered, slamming his phone down on his leg. "What is it?" Linda asked, leaning over. "She's famous, Mom," Patrick spat out, the jealousy making his voice ugly. She's practically a celebrity in the military world. There are articles here calling her the Iron Lady of the Pacific. Why didn't she monetize this? She could have book deals, she could be on CNN, she's sitting on a gold mine and she's just doing the job. He couldn't comprehend it. To Patrick, success that wasn't broadcasted wasn't success. It was waste. I offered to pay for her lost wages, Patrick groaned, putting his head in his hands. I offered her $500. She commands a wing worth billions. The humiliation was total. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was the court jester who hadn't realized the queen was in the room. Far away from that bubble of jealousy, my reality was shifting gears as the island of Maui came into view. Touchdown in 2 minutes, General, Major Davis announced. The massive aircraft descended. But we didn't head for the commercial terminal where the tourists were lining up for lies. We banked toward the military tarmac of the adjacent airfield. The wheels kissed the concrete with a screech of rubber, and the giant bird slowed down, taxiing toward a private hangar. As the ramp lowered at the back of the plane, the warm, tropical air flooded the cargo hold. I walked down the ramp, my sunglasses still on. Waiting at the bottom wasn't a shuttle bus. It was a convoy of 2 black government SUVs, their engines idling. A master sergeant stood by the open door of the lead vehicle, snapping a salute as I approached. "Welcome to Maui, General," he said. "We have your transport to the hotel ready. We'll get you there before the civilian traffic hits." "Thank you, Sergeant," I said, climbing into the air-conditioned leather interior. By the time I was settling into the cool silence of the convoy, the commercial flight was just touching down at the main terminal. 20 minutes later, the Grimes family deplaned, tired and sweaty. They trudged through the long corridors to baggage claim, waited 30 minutes for the carousel to spit out their mountain of Louis Vuitton bags, and finally dragged the luggage out to the curb. "Where is the Uber?" Mom complained, fanning herself with a brochure. "It's so humid." "I'm trying," Patrick yelled, staring at his phone. "The app is surging. It's a 40-minute wait for an XL, and the price is insane." "Well, call a taxi," Dad snapped, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Look at the line, Dad." Patrick pointed. The taxi line snaked around the block. There were at least 50 people ahead of them. They stood there, miserable, in their expensive clothes, inhaling the exhaust fumes of the buses. Suddenly, sirens chirped. The traffic officer blew his whistle, stopping the flow of taxis and pedestrians. Make a hole! Make a hole! Official convoy coming through." A pair of police motorcycles roared past, lights flashing. Behind them, 2 sleek black SUVs with tinted windows glided through the traffic like sharks cutting through water. They didn't stop. They didn't wait. They moved with purpose and authority. In the back seat of the lead SUV, for just a split second, a silhouette was visible. A woman with short blonde hair and sunglasses looking straight ahead, calm and cool. "Was that?" Mom started, squinting. "Yeah," Patrick said, his voice quiet and defeated. "That was her." The SUVs disappeared around the bend, heading toward the luxury resorts, while the Grimes family stood on the curb, waiting for a taxi that wasn't coming, holding their luggage and their bruised egos in the sweltering heat. The reception lawn at the Grand Wailea was a masterclass in American excess. Torchlights flickered against the darkening Maui sky, casting long dancing shadows over the tables draped in white linen and coral silk, the very color my mother had argued about on the phone just days ago. A string quartet played a soft, unrecognizable version of a pop song near the open bar, struggling to be heard over the clinking of crystal and the roar of the Pacific Ocean crashing against the beach nearby. I stood near the edge of the patio, holding a glass of sparkling water. I wasn't wearing my uniform. I had chosen a floor-length, navy blue gown. It was simple, structured, and unadorned by sequins or lace. It was the kind of dress that didn't scream for attention, yet somehow it demanded it. Since arriving, I hadn't said a word about my rank. I didn't have to. The rumor mill had done the work for me. I could feel the eyes on me. Guests I had never met, cousins from the bride's side, business partners of my father, were stealing glances, whispering behind their champagne flutes. The words "general" and "private plane" floated through the humid air like pollen. Is that her? A woman in a pink dress whispered loudly a few feet away. Patrick's sister. I heard she landed at the military base with a police escort. Yeah, her husband replied, looking at me with a nod of respect. She runs the whole airlift wing out here. Heavy hitter. I took a sip of water, feeling a calm amusement. For years, I had stood in the corners of rooms like this, feeling like the furniture. Tonight, I was the centerpiece. Mina. I turned. Patrick was approaching, a glass of scotch in his hand. He was wearing a white dinner jacket that made him look like a yacht captain in a bad movie. His face was tight, his smile plastered on with sheer force of will. You're causing a scene, he muttered, leaning in close so the nearby guests wouldn't hear. Everyone is asking about you. It's Jessica's day, you know, not the Mina show. I'm just standing here, Patrick, I said mildly. I haven't even made a toast. Well, try to blend in, he hissed. And don't bring up the plane again. It makes Dad look bad. Before I could respond, a hush fell over the group standing near the head table. A man was moving through the crowd, and he was cutting through the social strata like an icebreaker. It was Admiral Thomas Calloway, Jessica's father. He was a legend in the Navy before he retired. A 3-star vice admiral who had commanded fleets in the Persian Gulf. He was a man my father was desperate to impress, a man Patrick was terrified of. Admiral Calloway was tall, with a shock of white hair and a face weathered by decades of salt spray and command. He walked past the line of groomsmen. He walked past my father, who had started to extend a hand for a greeting. He walked right past Patrick, the groom, his own son-in-law. He stopped directly in front of me. The string quartet seemed to fade away. Patrick stood there, his glass halfway to his mouth, frozen. Admiral Calloway didn't offer me a limp social handshake. He extended a hand that felt like a block of oak. General Grimes, he boomed, his voice gravelly and warm. I heard you hitched a ride on a C-17 to get here, beating the storm. I took his hand, meeting his gaze firmly. Yes, Admiral. Necessity is the mother of invention, and the 15th Wing was heading this way for the Guam contingency anyway. Outstanding, Calloway grinned, a genuine expression that lit up his eyes. I worked with the 15th back in '04. Best logistics team in the Pacific. It's good to finally meet the officer keeping that machine running. Your reputation precedes you, General. Thank you, sir, I nodded. And congratulations on the wedding. Jessica looks beautiful. Patrick, realizing he was becoming invisible at his own wedding, stepped forward, practically elbowing his way into the circle. Yes, isn't she? Patrick said loudly, flashing his salesman smile. And speaking of logistics, Tom, you should see the bill for this setup. I told Jessica, spare no expense. We're projecting the ROI on this networking event to be huge. I've already handed out 3 business cards to your Navy buddies. The air grew instantly colder. Admiral Calloway slowly turned his head to look at Patrick. He looked at him the way a shark looks at a piece of driftwood, with total disinterest. This is a wedding, Patrick, not a board meeting, Calloway said dryly. And those Navy buddies are combat veterans. They aren't interested in your hedge fund. He turned his back on Patrick, effectively cutting him out of the conversation, and looked back at me. General, I'd love to get your take on the new strategic positioning in the South China Sea. I was reading your report on airlift capabilities last week. Sharp stuff. I'd be happy to discuss it, Admiral, I said. For the next 10 minutes, we spoke. We didn't talk about stock prices. We didn't talk about golf scores. We spoke the language of service, of duty, of the heavy burden of leadership. We spoke as equals. Patrick stood on the periphery, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He tried to interject once, making a joke about government spending, but the Admiral didn't even blink. And I simply raised an eyebrow. He was out of his depth. No amount of money in his bank account could buy him entry into this conversation. He was a tourist in a land where we were the natives. Across the lawn, sitting at the parents' table, my mother watched. Linda Grimes had spent 40 years curating an image. She valued the right clothes, the right schools, the right connections. She had spent her life apologizing for Mina, for her manly job, for her lack of a husband, for her poverty. But now she watched the most powerful man in the room, a man her husband fawned over, treating her failure of a daughter with a reverence he didn't show anyone else. She watched Mina's posture. She saw the way Mina held her head high, not with arrogance, but with the quiet assurance of someone who knows exactly who she is. She saw the Admiral laughing at something Mina said, a genuine laugh of camaraderie. For the first time, Linda didn't see the lack of a designer handbag. She didn't see the lack of a diamond ring. She saw power. "Robert," Linda whispered to my father, who was sullenly poking at his salad. "What?" he grunted. "Look at her," Linda said softly, her eyes fixed on me. "She's not just attending. She's holding court." "She's just talking shop," Robert muttered, though he couldn't take his eyes off the scene either. "No," Linda corrected him, a strange note of realization creeping into her voice. "She's impressive. I never thought she looked like us. But looking at her now, standing there with the Admiral, she looks better than us." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a total transformation of character. But it was a crack in the armor. It was an admission that the yardstick they had used to measure me for 40 years had been broken all along. The Admiral finished his drink and patted my shoulder. "We need more officers like you, Mina," he said, dropping the title for a moment of personal sincerity. "Don't let the civilians grind you down. You're doing the Lord's work up there." "I'll do my best, sir," I smiled. As the Admiral walked away to join the bride, Patrick slumped visibly, his ego bruised purple. He looked at me, his mouth opening to make some snide remark, some last-ditch attempt to reclaim his superiority. But he stopped. He looked at the Navy officers nearby who were nodding at me. He looked at our parents watching from the table. He closed his mouth, turned on his heel, and walked toward the bar. I stood alone under the tiki torches, listening to the ocean. I took another sip of my water. It tasted better than any champagne they could have served. I had walked into the lion's den, and the biggest lion of them all had bowed. The reception had finally wound down. The Grand Wailea returned to its expensive tranquility, leaving only the rhythmic sound of the Pacific Ocean crashing against the shore. I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, barefoot on the cool tiles, holding a cup of tea. I watched the moonlight cut a silver path across the dark water, finally feeling the adrenaline of the last 24 hours begin to ebb. The sliding glass door of the adjacent suite opened. The smell of a cigar drifted over the privacy divider. "Mina." It was my father. "I'm here, Dad," I said, not turning around. He leaned against the railing. For a long time, he didn't speak. He just smoked, looking out at the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual booming authority. It sounded smaller. "You were impressive tonight," Robert Grimes said. "Admiral Calloway thinks the world of you. He told me I must be very proud." "And what did you say?" "I said I was," he replied. And then I realized, I haven't said those words to you in a long time. Maybe ever. I turned to face him. Illuminated by the amber balcony light, my father looked old. Not distinguished, just tired. "I'm sorry, Mina," he said, rusty and awkward. "About the ticket, about the seat, I misjudged the situation." I listened to the words. 10 years ago, they would have made me cry with gratitude. Tonight, I heard the subtext. He wasn't apologizing because he hurt me. He was apologizing because he had been embarrassed in front of the Admiral. He was trying to fix his own ego. "I accept your apology, Dad," I said calmly. Relief washed over his face. He immediately reached into his dinner jacket and pulled out his checkbook. His universal solution to every problem. "I want to make it right," he said, clicking his pen. "Let me write you a check. For the difference in the ticket price. Or a vacation. First class, just you. My treat." It was tragic. He didn't know any other language but money. "Put the checkbook away, Dad," I said. "But I want to help." "I don't need your money," I said, my voice steady. "I command a wing of the strongest military on Earth. I don't need your protection." I stepped closer to the railing. "I don't need anything from you, Dad. except one thing. The next time you talk about me to your friends, or to Mom, or to Patrick, don't talk about what I don't have. Talk about who I am. I'm not Mina the disappointment. I'm General Grimes. If you can respect that, we're good. If you can't, then we'll just see each other at Christmas." He looked stunned. Slowly, he slid the checkbook back into his pocket. "General Grimes," he repeated, testing the weight of the title. He nodded. "Okay, I can do that. Good night, Dad." I stepped back inside and locked the door. I had drawn a line in the sand, and for the first time, I didn't step back. 3 weeks later. The air in my office at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam was cool and smelled of ozone. The wedding felt like a lifetime ago. My secure phone rang. New York area code. "This is General Grimes." "Hey, it's Patrick." I paused. Patrick never called. "Hello, Patrick. Everything okay?" "Yeah, no." His voice sounded tinny and exhausted. The salesman bravado was gone. "I just wanted to say, you were right." "About what?" "About everything," he sighed. "I looked up your salary, then I looked up your command responsibilities. I felt like an idiot." "You don't have to apologize." "I do," he interrupted. "But I also wanted to tell you, I was jealous. I've been jealous for years." I blinked. "Jealous?" "Patrick, you're the golden boy. You have the millions." "It's all leverage, Mina," he whispered. "The condo, the Porsche, the wedding, it's all debt. I'm leveraged to the hilt to keep up this image. Every day I wake up terrified the market will turn and I'll lose it all." He let out a dry, bitter laugh. "I looked at you at the wedding, no jewelry, driving a Honda. But you looked so solid. You actually are who you say you are. I'm just playing a character in a suit. And I hated you because you were real and I was just expensive." For years, I had envied him. Now I only felt a distant compassion. "You can change, Patrick," I said. "You don't have to play the role." "Maybe," he said. "Anyway, I'm proud of you, sis. For real." "Thanks, Patrick." I hung up. The silence in the office felt heavy, but good. It was the weight of truth. I opened the top drawer of my desk. Inside lay my challenge coins and a few personal mementos. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a scrap of paper. It was smoothed out now, but the deep creases where my father had crumpled it were still visible. The boarding pass. Seat 48B. Economy. I didn't throw it away. I placed it gently in the drawer, right next to the velvet box containing my Legion of Merit medal. They belonged together. The medal was who I was. The ticket was a reminder of where I would never allow myself to be put again. It was the scar that proved I survived the wound. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering the lesson without carrying the pain. I closed the drawer with a soft click. "General." Captain Rouse stood at the door with a clipboard. "The squadron is prepped. The birds are fueled. We're waiting on your signature to launch." I picked up my pen and looked out the window at the flight line, where the gray giants were waiting for me. "Let's go fly," I said, smiling. I signed the paper with a flourish. Mina J. Grimes, Brigadier General, USAF, and that was enough. That was my journey, but I know so many of you are fighting similar battles right now. Maybe you don't command a C-17, but make no mistake. You are a general in your own life. You are surviving storms nobody else sees. So, here is my final order for you. Don't let anyone, not even your family, convince you that you belong in the back row. You belong in the cockpit. If this story gave you strength, please subscribe to the channel so we can fight these battles together. And drop a comment below with the words, "I am the pilot," to claim your power today. Let's fly high.